The bitter wind howled across the Oklahoma Territory, carrying ice crystals that stung like needles against exposed skin. Under the twisted branches of an ancient cottonwood tree, Clara Whitlock pulled her children closer, trying to shield them from the merciless cold with nothing but her threadbare shawl and her own trembling body. "Mama, I'm so cold," whispered 6-year-old Samuel, his lips blue and quivering. "I know, my love," Clara answered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Just hold on a little longer." 4-year-old Lila had stopped complaining hours ago, a silence that terrified Clara more than her son's whimpers. The little girl's eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow. Clara knew what this meant. She had seen it before in the settlement, the dangerous drowsiness that preceded freezing to death. This was their third night beneath the cottonwood, cast out from what was once their home, abandoned by those who should have protected them. Clara fought against the crushing weight of hopelessness as she gazed at the distant lights of the settlement, so close, yet unreachable. Have you ever wondered what you would do if everything was taken from you in an instant? If the people you trusted turned their backs when you needed them most? This is the story of a woman who faced the cruelest winter of the frontier with nothing but her courage and love for her children, and how an unexpected act of kindness from the most feared outsider changed everything. If this sounds like a story worth hearing, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the untamed West that history books often overlook. Clara Evans wasn't born to the hardships of frontier life. The daughter of a respected schoolteacher in St. Louis, she grew up surrounded by books and ideas, her imagination filled with stories of adventure and possibility. Her father taught her to read the classics, while her mother showed her how to manage a household with grace and efficiency. They weren't wealthy, but they lived comfortably, their home warm with conversation and learning. When Thomas Whitlock arrived in St. Louis in the spring of 1890, he brought with him tales of the Oklahoma Territory, a place where land was available for those brave enough to claim it, where a family could build something from nothing. He spoke with such passion about the open skies and fertile soil that Clara found herself drawn to both the man and his vision. "There's nothing like watching the sun rise over land that belongs to you," Thomas told her during their courtship. "Nothing like knowing that everything you build is yours by right of your own sweat and determination." They married within 6 months, against the gentle concerns of Clara's parents, who worried about the hardships their daughter would face. But Clara was 22, filled with the certainty of youth and love. She packed her books, her mother's silver hairbrush, and her grandmother's quilt, and set her face toward the western horizon. The journey was harder than she had imagined, weeks of jolting wagon travel, nights spent under stars that seemed colder and more distant than those above St. Louis. But Thomas's hand in hers was warm, his promises constant, and when they finally reached the patch of land that would become their homestead, Clara felt a surge of pride and possibility. Together, they built their cabin log by log, Thomas cutting timber while Clara mixed mud for chinking. Their hands blistered, their backs ached, but each day brought progress. By the time the first snow fell, they had a roof over their heads and a small stove that filled the single room with warmth. The arrival of Thomas's family should have been a blessing, more hands to work the land, more company during the isolated winter months. But from the moment Silas Whitlock and his mother Martha stepped down from their wagon, Clara sensed the undercurrent of resentment. "So this is what my brother abandoned us for," Silas remarked, his gaze sweeping dismissively over the modest homestead. "Hardly seems worth the trouble." Martha's disapproval was less vocal but more constant, a critical eye on Clara's housekeeping, a pursed lip at her cooking, a sharp comment about her city ways. Clara tried to bridge the gap with kindness, but the older woman remained cold, particularly after Samuel was born, followed 2 years later by Lila. "Those children have too much of you in them," Martha would say, watching the toddlers play. "Not enough Whitlock strength." Despite these tensions, the homestead prospered. Thomas proved to be as skilled a farmer as he was a dreamer. Their first harvest was modest but promising, their livestock healthy. Clara planted a small garden that yielded vegetables for their table and herbs for medicine. She taught Samuel his letters by firelight and sang Lila to sleep with songs from her childhood. For 7 years, they carved out a life on the edge of civilization, weathering droughts and blizzards, celebrating small victories, and planning for a future that seemed within reach. Then came the fever. It swept through the settlement like wildfire, claiming the old and the young with equal ferocity. When Thomas first complained of a headache, Clara told herself it was nothing, just exhaustion from the long days of work. But by nightfall, he was burning up, his skin hot to the touch, his eyes glazed and unfocused. "It's just a passing thing," he assured her, his voice already weakened. "I'll be on my feet by morning." But morning brought only higher fever and the terrifying rattle in his chest that Clara had learned to fear. She sent Samuel running to fetch the settlement's doctor, a gruff man who had once been an army surgeon. He came quickly, but his expression told Clara everything before he even spoke. "Keep him comfortable," the doctor advised, packing away his instruments. "There's not much else to be done." For 3 days, Clara barely left Thomas's side, bathing his forehead with cool water, forcing sips of broth between his cracked lips, praying with a fervor that surprised even her. Silas and Martha kept their distance, fear of contagion overriding family duty. On the 4th morning, as dawn broke over the plains, Thomas opened his eyes with sudden clarity. "Take care of our children," he whispered, his hand squeezing hers with the last of his strength. "Remember that you are stronger than you know." By noon, he was gone. The burial was brief, the ground too frozen for a deep grave. The settlement's preacher spoke words that Clara barely heard, her mind still unable to grasp the reality that Thomas was gone. Samuel stood rigid beside her, trying to be the man his father had taught him to be, while Lila clung to her skirts, too young to understand the finality of death. It was after the neighbors had departed, leaving only family at the graveside, that Silas finally spoke directly to Clara. "The homestead belongs to the Whitlock family now," he said, his voice as cold as the wind that cut through Clara's black dress. "My brother may have had romantic notions about you, but blood is what matters out here." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "That land is as much mine as it is yours. Thomas and I built it together, for our children." Martha stepped forward, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "You brought nothing but misfortune to this family. My son would still be alive if he hadn't been weakened by providing for you and those children." The accusation was so absurd that Clara couldn't immediately respond. The fever had taken strong men throughout the settlement, it had nothing to do with her presence or her children. But in the days that followed, it became clear that reason would not prevail. Silas began moving his belongings into the main cabin, relegating Clara and the children to the storage lean-to. Martha took over the kitchen, discarding Clara's carefully preserved stores and rearranging everything to her liking. "You should be grateful we're allowing you to stay at all," Silas told her when she protested. "Many widows find themselves with nothing." A week after Thomas's death, Clara returned from drawing water to find her few remaining possessions, her books, Thomas's letters, the children's clothes, thrown into the snow. Silas stood in the doorway, a rifle in his hands. "We've decided you're no longer welcome," he announced. "You're a drain on resources we can't afford." "You can't do this," Clara protested, gathering her scattered belongings. "Where are we supposed to go? It's the middle of winter." "That's not my concern," Silas replied. "The settlement has a church. Perhaps they'll take pity on you." But the church was locked, its pastor away visiting another settlement. The neighbors who had offered condolences at Thomas's funeral now closed their doors, unwilling to defy Silas or take on the burden of 3 extra mouths to feed during the leanest months. With nowhere else to turn, Clara led her children to the edge of the woods, where an ancient cottonwood stood. Its massive trunk and spreading branches offered some shelter from the wind, and Clara hoped it would be enough until she could formulate a plan. "Are we going to die, Mama?" Samuel asked that first night, his voice small but steady. Clara pulled him close, along with Lila. "No, my brave ones. We are going to survive. Your father believed in us, and we won't let him down." But as the temperature dropped and their meager supplies dwindled, Clara's confidence wavered. Each morning, she ventured out to gather firewood, leaving the children huddled together beneath the quilt she had salvaged. Each evening, she returned with less than they needed, the accessible branches already stripped from nearby trees. By the third day, their food was gone, the small bundle of cornbread and dried apples that Clara had managed to grab before being evicted. She tried to distract the children with stories, with games of imagination, but hunger made them listless and the cold sapped their energy. That night, as darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, Clara faced the terrible truth: they would not survive another day without help. She had tried to reach the next settlement, 10 miles distant, but the snow was too deep, the children too weak to make the journey. As Lila drifted into an unnaturally quiet sleep and Samuel's shivering grew more violent, Clara did something she hadn't done since Thomas died: she wept. Not the quiet tears of grief she had allowed herself at his graveside, but deep, racking sobs of despair and rage. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her children, to Thomas, to the uncaring sky. "I'm so sorry." The sound of her weeping carried across the snow-covered clearing, echoing in the stillness of the winter night. And perhaps it was this raw expression of human suffering, that drew attention to their plight. For as Clara finally fell silent, exhausted by emotion and cold, she heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps in snow, deliberate and measured, approaching their meager shelter. Have you ever experienced a moment when hope seemed completely lost, only to find help from the most unexpected source? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories of unexpected kindness. Clara tensed, pulling her children closer. In the gathering dusk, a figure emerged, tall and imposing, wrapped in a buffalo hide cloak that seemed to blend with the shadows. His face, visible in the fading light, was marked by the elements, his dark eyes watchful and assessing. Clara recognized him immediately, though they had never spoken. The settlers called him Hawk, a Comanche warrior who occasionally traded with the settlement but was generally regarded with suspicion and fear. Stories circulated about his prowess in battle, his ability to move unseen through the territory, his refusal to be confined to the reservations where many of his people had been forced. Fear clutched at Clara's heart. She had no weapon, no strength to fight, no way to protect her children. But instead of attacking, Hawk knelt in the snow several feet away, his movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching frightened animals. From beneath his cloak, he withdrew a small bundle wrapped in hide. With careful movements, he unwrapped it to reveal strips of dried meat and a handful of berries preserved in fat. He placed these on a flat stone between them, then backed away, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. Samuel stirred, the scent of food rousing him from his half-frozen state. "Mama," he whispered, his gaze fixed on the offering. Clara hesitated only briefly. Pride had no place in survival. "Thank you," she said to Hawk, her voice hoarse from crying and cold. He nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the darkness as silently as he had come. That night, with food in their bellies for the first time in days, Clara and her children slept more soundly beneath their inadequate shelter. When morning came, Clara was startled to find a pile of firewood stacked neatly beside them, with no sign of who had delivered it. Hawk returned at dusk, this time carrying not only food but also several rabbit skins and a bone needle with sinew thread. He kept his distance, watching as Clara fed the children, then gestured toward their makeshift shelter with a shake of his head. "Not good," he said, his English accented but clear. "Too cold." It was the first time Clara had heard him speak. She looked at their pitiful arrangement of branches and agreed. "We have nothing better." Hawk considered this, then pointed to himself and made a sweeping motion with his hands. "I show." Over the next hours, as the light faded and the stars emerged in the clear, cold sky, Hawk taught Clara and Samuel how to build a proper shelter, a small dome of bent saplings covered with pine boughs and packed snow, with an entrance that faced away from the prevailing wind. Inside, they created a floor of more boughs, insulating them from the frozen ground. The work was exhausting, but when they finished, the difference was immediate. The small space retained their body heat, the wind no longer cut through their clothing, and for the first time since being cast out, Clara felt a flicker of hope. "Why are you helping us?" she asked Hawk as they sat by the small fire he had shown them how to build, efficient and nearly smokeless. He was silent for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his words carefully chosen. "I see. 3 days. No one helps. Not right." He looked at the children, now sleeping more peacefully than they had in days. Children should not suffer for adult pride. Clara nodded, understanding that he referred not just to her situation but to a deeper history, the suffering of his own people at the hands of settlers who valued land over lives. "Thank you," she said again, the words inadequate for the debt she owed him. Hawk acknowledged her gratitude with a slight inclination of his head, then rose to leave. "Tomorrow," he said, "teach hunting." True to his word, Hawk returned the next day, bringing with him simple tools fashioned from wood and bone. To Samuel, he showed how to set snares for rabbits along their trails in the snow. To Clara, he demonstrated how to identify edible bark and roots that could be harvested even in winter. For Lila, he carved a small wooden doll, its features simple but expressive. "My daughter had such a toy," he explained when he saw Clara's questioning look. "Long ago." The simple statement revealed more about him than anything else he had said. Clara realized that this man, whom the settlers feared and avoided, had known loss just as she had, perhaps even greater loss. Days passed, and under Hawk's guidance, their situation improved. The shelter kept them warm, the snares occasionally yielded rabbits or squirrels, and Clara learned to make a stew from bones, bark, and the few roots they could dig from beneath the snow. It wasn't abundance, but it was survival. More importantly, they were learning. Samuel proudly brought home his first rabbit, his face alight with accomplishment. Lila gathered kindling, singing softly to her wooden doll. Clara found herself watching Hawk's methods carefully, asking questions, adapting his techniques to their needs. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Hawk unexpectedly began to speak of his own life. His words came slowly at first, then with increasing fluency as he shared the story of his people's displacement, the loss of his wife and daughter to smallpox brought by traders, his choice to live apart from both the reservation and his remaining tribal members. "Why do you stay in this territory?" Clara asked. "Where the settlers hate you." Hawk gazed into the fire. "This land knows me. I know it. We speak to each other." He looked up at the star-filled sky. "My ancestors watch from there. I cannot leave them." As February gave way to March, and the first hints of thaw appeared in patches of exposed ground, Clara realized that something had changed between them. Hawk was no longer just their savior, he had become a friend, a teacher, someone whose presence they welcomed rather than merely needed. She found herself sharing stories of her own life, her childhood in St. Louis, her dreams of education for her children, her love for Thomas and the pain of his loss. Hawk listened with quiet attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed his curiosity about the world beyond his experience. "Your people have many things," he observed one evening. "Books, machines, weapons. But they forget how to see." "See what?" Clara asked. "The world as it is. Not as they wish it to be." He gestured to the night sky, where stars blazed in patterns Clara had never noticed before. "They look up and see only darkness between lights. They miss the dance." Clara followed his gaze and tried to see what he saw, not individual stars but patterns, relationships, a cosmic choreography that had guided his people for generations. For a moment, she glimpsed it, and the night sky transformed from a random scattering of lights to a living tapestry of meaning. "I think I understand," she said softly. Hawk smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "You learn to see. This is good." Their peaceful existence couldn't last forever. As the snow receded and travel became easier, hunters from the settlement ventured farther into the woods. One morning, Samuel returned from checking the snares with troubling news. "Men were talking by the creek," he reported, his young face serious. They saw our shelter. They said bad things about us and about Hawk. Clara's heart sank. She had known this moment would come, the moment when their fragile sanctuary would be threatened by the prejudices of the settlement. Word spread quickly through the settlement. Clara Whitlock, the widow cast out by her husband's family, was living in the woods with a Comanche warrior. Rumors multiplied, each more outrageous than the last. She had become his woman, she had betrayed her race, she was practicing heathen rituals, she had gone mad with grief. Silas Whitlock, already burdened by the whispers that he had treated his brother's widow cruelly, found in these rumors a way to redirect the settlement's judgment. He spoke loudly in the general store about the danger of savages corrupting white women, about his duty to protect his niece and nephew from such influence. "It's clear she's not in her right mind," he declared to the gathered men. "Grief has turned her head. We need to rescue those children before they're corrupted beyond salvation." Some nodded in agreement, particularly those who had turned Clara away in her hour of need and now sought to ease their guilt through righteous action. Others were less certain, remembering Thomas Whitlock's good character and questioning whether his widow could have fallen so far. But Silas was persuasive, and fear was a powerful motivator. On a clear evening in early April, a group of men gathered at the edge of the settlement, armed with rifles and torches. Their mission, as Silas described it, was one of rescue and restoration of proper order. They moved through the woods with none of Hawk's silence, their voices carrying ahead of them, their torches casting long shadows among the trees. Clara heard them coming long before they arrived, the sound of their approach like thunder before a storm. "They're coming for us," she told Hawk, who had been teaching Lila how to weave a small basket from reeds. "You should go. They won't harm me or the children, but you." Hawk rose to his feet, his expression calm. "I will not run." "Please," Clara urged. "There are too many of them." But Hawk merely shook his head. "Some things must be faced. This is one." As the torches appeared among the trees, Clara gathered her children close, standing tall before the shelter that had been their home through the worst of winter. Hawk stood beside her, unarmed but unbowed, his presence a statement in itself. Silas led the group into the clearing, his rifle held ready, his face flushed with self-importance and the exertion of the march. Behind him came a dozen men from the settlement, some looking determined, others uncomfortable with their role in this confrontation. "Step away from the savage, Clara," Silas commanded. "We've come to take you and the children back where you belong." Clara didn't move. "Where I belong? You threw us out to die in the snow. You took everything we had built. Where exactly do you think we belong, Silas?" Her direct challenge seemed to catch him off guard. He had expected fear, perhaps gratitude for the rescue, not this calm defiance. "You're not thinking clearly," he blustered. "Living out here like animals, consorting with," he gestured dismissively toward Hawk. "His name is Hawk," Clara interrupted. "And he did what none of you would do. He helped us when we were starving. He taught us to survive when you left us to die." A murmur ran through the group of men. One of them, Jacob Miller, a farmer who had been friends with Thomas, lowered his torch slightly. "Is that true, Clara? Did no one help you after Silas turned you out?" "You know it's true, Jacob," Clara replied steadily. "I came to your door. To everyone's door. Not one of you would take us in." Jacob looked away, shame evident in his posture. Others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding each other's eyes. Silas, sensing he was losing control of the situation, raised his voice. "That's beside the point. The point is, she's living here with a Comanche. What kind of example is that for Thomas's children?" "An excellent one," Clara shot back. "They're learning that kindness matters more than the color of a man's skin. They're learning that true strength isn't about domination but about helping others survive." She took a step forward, her voice gaining strength. "What are they learning from you, Silas? That it's acceptable to cast out a widow and her children? That greed trumps family loyalty? That might makes right. The clearing fell silent except for the crackling of torches. Clara's words hung in the air, challenging not just Silas but the entire settlement's complicity in what had happened to her family. You all knew Thomas, she continued, her gaze moving from face to face. You knew the kind of man he was, fair, hard-working, always willing to lend a hand. What would he think of how his family has been treated? What would he think of how his brother has behaved? Several men looked down at their boots. Thomas Whitlock had indeed been well respected, his generosity remembered by many who had benefited from it during their own hard times. Silas, feeling the mood shifting against him, tried a different approach. The Indian has bewitched her, he declared. Can't you see? She's not herself. At this, Samuel stepped forward, his small face set in lines of determination that echoed his father's. You're lying, Uncle Silas, he said clearly. Hawk helped us when you wouldn't. He taught me to hunt and make snares. He showed Mama how to build our shelter. He never hurt us or scared us. The boy's intervention, so unexpected and so clearly genuine, seemed to deflate Silas's bluster. He stared at his nephew, momentarily speechless. Into this silence, Hawk finally spoke, his deep voice carrying easily across the clearing. I have no quarrel with any man here. I helped this woman and her children because it was right. I will continue to help them if they wish it. Or I will go, if that brings peace. His dignity and restraint stood in stark contrast to Silas's aggressive posturing. Several of the men exchanged glances, reassessing the situation. Jacob Miller stepped forward, lowering his rifle completely. I think we've made a mistake here, Silas. Clara and the children seem well. Better than they might have been if left to the mercy of the winter. You can't be serious, Silas sputtered. Taking the word of a savage over. That's enough, interrupted another settler, an older man named Harrington who had once been the settlement's judge before retiring to farm. I've heard nothing here that justifies our interference. Mrs. Whitlock has chosen her path, and by all evidence, her children are healthy and well cared for. That's more than can be said for how they fared under your roof, Silas. If you've been moved by this story of courage and unexpected friendship, please share this video with others who might appreciate this remarkable tale of human connection that transcends boundaries. One by one, the men lowered their weapons. Some nodded respectfully to Clara before turning away. Others avoided her gaze, shame evident in their hurried departure. Within minutes, only Silas remained, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, he threatened, backing away. The territory has laws against. Against what? Clara challenged. Against survival. Against kindness. You'll find no law that prohibits what has happened here, Silas. But you might find plenty that speak to your treatment of your brother's widow and children. With a final glare of impotent fury, Silas turned and stalked away, following the retreating torches back toward the settlement. When they were alone again, Clara felt her knees weaken. She sank onto a log by their fire pit, the tension that had held her upright suddenly dissolving. You were very brave, Hawk observed, sitting beside her while the children returned to their interrupted activities with the resilience of youth. I was terrified, Clara admitted. But I couldn't let them take away what we've built here, not just the shelter, but the understanding. The respect. Hawk nodded. Fear makes people forget who they are. You reminded them. In the days that followed, Clara expected further trouble from Silas, but it never materialized. Instead, something unexpected happened. Jacob Miller appeared at their clearing one morning, carrying a sack of cornmeal and a small crate of preserved vegetables. It's not much, he said awkwardly, but my wife and I thought you might need it. And we wanted to say we're sorry. For not helping when we should have. He was the first, but not the last. Other settlers came, not all at once, and not in large numbers, but steadily. They brought small offerings, seeds for spring planting, a mended blanket, a pair of boots that might fit Samuel when he grew a bit more. Each gift was accompanied by halting apologies, by acknowledgments of failure and promises to do better. Clara accepted these gestures with grace, neither dwelling on past wrongs nor dismissing them too easily. She understood that change came slowly, that the settlement was taking its first tentative steps toward a different kind of community. As spring advanced and the land awakened from its winter sleep, Clara and Hawk began to build a more permanent dwelling at the edge of the woods. It was a modest cabin, smaller than the one she had shared with Thomas but sturdy and well-designed, incorporating both settler techniques and Comanche wisdom about placement and materials. To Clara's surprise, several men from the settlement offered to help with the heavy work of raising the walls and setting the roof beams. They worked alongside Hawk without the previous tension, learning from his methods even as they contributed their own skills. "You've changed things," Hawk observed one evening as they watched the nearly completed cabin catch the last rays of sunset. "Not just for yourself, but for others." Clara considered this. Perhaps. Or perhaps we changed things together. Hawk smiled, the expression now more familiar on his weathered face. Together is better than alone. The new cabin was finished just as summer arrived in full force, its single room supplemented by a lean-to for storage and a small garden already sprouting with vegetables. Clara had begun taking in mending from the settlement, her skilled needlework providing a modest income. Samuel's snares regularly caught game, which they traded for items they couldn't produce themselves. Hawk did not live with them, he maintained his own camp deeper in the woods, but he visited often, continuing to teach the children and to share meals with the small family that had become so important to him. Sometimes he brought other Comanche to meet them, cautiously extending the circle of understanding that had begun in the depths of winter. Silas and Martha remained hostile, but their influence in the settlement had waned. The truth of their treatment of Clara and the children had become widely known, and many who had once respected them now kept their distance. They continued to live in the homestead that had been Thomas's dream, but it was a cold place, lacking the warmth and purpose that Clara had brought to it. By the following spring, Clara had established a small school in a corner of her cabin, teaching not only her own children but several others from the settlement whose parents valued education. More surprisingly, 2 Comanche families had begun sending their children as well, eager for them to learn reading and writing while still maintaining their own cultural teachings. The school became a bridge between worlds that had previously existed in suspicious isolation. Children who played and learned together carried their experiences home, gradually shifting perceptions and challenging long-held prejudices. "You have created something important," Hawk told Clara as they watched the mixed group of children engaged in a counting game in the yard. "Something that will last beyond us." Clara nodded, understanding the truth of his words. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had transformed into something far more significant, a demonstration that different ways of living and knowing could coexist, could even strengthen each other. "We created it," she corrected gently. "I couldn't have done this alone." Hawk's hand found hers, a rare gesture of physical connection that spoke volumes about how far they had come. "Nor I." Years later, when Samuel and Lila were grown with children of their own, they would tell the story of that terrible winter and the unexpected salvation that came with it. They would speak of their mother's courage, of Hawk's kindness, of how the worst moment of their lives had ultimately led to something beautiful and enduring. The old cottonwood still stood at the edge of the woods, its branches now sheltering picnics rather than desperate refugees. Clara often sat beneath it, especially when the challenges of bridging 2 worlds seemed particularly daunting. The tree reminded her of how far they had come, of the strength that could be found in the darkest moments. "The tree remembers," Hawk would say when he found her there, his English now fluent after years of daily conversation, though he still preferred the rhythms and nuances of his native tongue when speaking of important matters. "Yes," Clara would agree, making room for him on the blanket she spread beneath the spreading branches. "And so do we." Their story became legend in the territory, the widow and the warrior who defied convention and created a new way of living. Some romanticized it, missing the hard truths of survival and prejudice that had shaped their journey. Others dismissed it as an anomaly, unwilling to recognize the broader implications of their example. But for those who truly understood, for the children who grew up in the shadow of their courage, for the community that slowly formed around their vision of respect and cooperation, Clara and Hawk represented something profound, the possibility that even in the harshest wilderness, compassion could take root and flourish. And in a land defined by conflict and conquest, that was perhaps the most revolutionary idea of all, that the frontier's true legacy might not be one of domination, but of unexpected kindness that changed everything.